Welcome to Mormon Book Reviews, where an evangelical encounters the restoration. I'm your host, Steven Pynakker, and this is the first panel discussion I have done since probably last March or April when I had my sudden hearing loss and actually had a really difficult time hearing, and also have hypoacusis, which makes me very, very suspect, very attuned to sound. And sometimes the panel discussions, there's a lot of cacophony of voices going on. And so I was kind of afraid to do a panel discussion, but now I feel like it's gotten better. So I want to thank everybody for their thoughts and prayers. And I'm really excited about this because I went on Wednesday. Today is Friday, November 15th, 2024. And we're taping this today and planning on releasing it later today. And I just went and saw the Heretic movie, and everybody here within the last week has also seen the Heretic movie, which I think was a surprisingly good film. And I felt that it does deserve to have a conversation that I think is really important. I think everybody here is a person of faith on some level. So I think it would be interesting to get, and if you're not, let me know. But I think we're all people of faith in this conversation. And I think this movie is a horror film. Um, and a lot of people who are Christians or conservative Latter-day Saints often shy away from horror. But I actually a couple years ago had a guest on where we talked about how Christian the horror genre is, especially within Western Christianity. Basically, horror movies are a conversation with Christianity, whether it's resurrection, whether it's supernatural stuff. It really does play a role. And often people say, like, if you look at the writings of Stephen King, it's seeped in a good versus evil world. It's a Christian world that is inhabited there. So some people who are afraid to shy or want to shy away from this stuff, I say, horror is actually something that is part of the Christian canon, if you will. And I think it's really important, or the Christianity has been very influential on it. So I'm going to get off my soapbox and introduce my all-star panel here today. First of all, the person who was responsible for the impetus for this whole thing was Dr. Kyle Bashirs in the house. Welcome to the program, sir.
Hey, and thanks, Steve, for having me.
Kyle is an evangelical Christian who is also a well-regarded Mormon scholar who's recently appointed to the board of directors of the John Whitmer Historical Association. And he's the main reason why we're doing this. He went and saw the movie on Monday. He gave me his review, and I went and saw a Wednesday matinee. All right, now we got the man with the beard. Oh my gosh, Benjamin Schaefer in the house, the man who puts fun in Mormon fundamentalism, the Ogden Kraut of the 21st century. Benjamin Schaefer, welcome to the program.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. There's a lot of fun stuff about this movie that really touches on, I think, these tensions. So I'm excited to represent fundamentalism, and
And
hopefully we'll make it fun today.
yes, absolutely. And today's portraying themselves, if you will, starring as sister missionaries, if you will, sister missionaries, Jessica and Jasmine. Welcome to the program.
Hello, thank you so much. Yes, we are the token sister missionaries here.
Happy to be here. Thank you for having us.
Uh-huh.
And great, Greg, you could join us today. And of course, a man who you have to really pull out to get opinions from this guy. Like this guy just holds things really close to the breast. He's kind of an introvert, so it was almost, I mean, he hardly goes on programs and gives his views. Of course, we're talking about Jim Bennett. How you doing, sir? Turn on the microphone.
Sorry, I'm an introvert, so I had to keep the microphone off. So I actually am an introvert, but that's a long, messy story.
Oh yeah, sometimes, yep, I get that too. I can arguably be one myself, I think sometimes as well. So Jim, a man, of course, who's not afraid to give his opinion, and actually one of the first times we had him on to give his opinion was about the Under the Banner of Heaven miniseries movie a couple
All
years
right.
ago. And you really
Yes.
tore into that thing, man. I'll tell you, that was a fun episode. I had a blast with you. So that's why I'm so glad you're able to join us today. And of course, the man who is really interesting. We've actually, this is the first time I ever face-to-face conversation. Ryan Love in the house is well known on TikTok and is a Mormon history aficionado. Welcome to the program, sir.
Yes, sir. It's good to be here, Steve.
All right. So we're all here and we all have opinions, I think, about this movie, The Heretic. And I want to actually now of course, he leaves his seat. Okay. I'm going to start with you, Kyle, because you're the impetus for
Sure.
this whole conversation. Kind of give your perspective on this film. Maybe what were your thoughts going into it? and then while you're watching the film and absorbing it, and just kind of give us your overall the thoughts on it.
Sure. So I am not a horror genre person whatsoever. I don't like horror films. I don't make it a point to get excited about Halloween and that type of a thing. But when I saw that there was going to be sister missionaries in a psychological slash horror film, I tried to keep up with public perception of Latter-day Saints and their culture and their doctrine and their practices. And so I felt like I should go and see this. I went in guarded because, again, I don't like the horror genre fiction. But probably 30 minutes into the movie, all of the concerns I had that this was going to be some kind of film that portrays Latter-day Saints as dupes and naive and foolish, and that evil was going to win, started to evaporate. And then I began to pick up on the hints and the clues that the directors, Scott Beck and Brian Woods, had really done their homework, and that they were crafting one of the most complex psychological thrillers I think I've ever seen. And then I started to enjoy the film, and I started to pay attention now to the messages and the overarching kind of themes that the writers were trying to get across. And I walked away with an opinion that I had no anticipation of walking away with. I thought it was a really excellent film. And so just for the audience to know, like, none of us have really shared our opinions about what we thought of the film. So I could be an odd duck out here. But right away, I had to call you, Steve, and say, like, hey, I think this is something worth having a conversation because of the intersection of the Latter-day Saint protagonists, the pair of sister missionaries, Sister Barnes and Sister Paxton, who are confronted with this evil character, Mr. Reed, played by Hugh Grant brilliantly, and the collision of essentially two worldviews or ideologies or religions, one of absolute sinister control and one of faith and perseverance through evil. And so, yeah, that's kind of my 30,000-foot view. I don't know if we're going to get into like very specific plot points. Maybe we should warn viewers. We do intend to get to some spoilers. So if they don't want to hear anything, if they want to go see the movie before they watch this, maybe recommend they do that now. But yeah, so that's my introduction to it.
Yeah, great. I appreciate it. And so let's talk to the ladies now here real quick. Jessica and Jasmine. I want to get a female perspective on, and I'm really glad you both were able to join us, because obviously this is females' voices need to be heard in this story. So I want to kind of get both of your thoughts on this film.
Do you want to go?
I could you go first?
Sure.
Sorry.
I thoroughly enjoyed the film. I had a lot of messaging that was that had me walk in thinking that it was like an anti-Mormon film. And as I was going through the film, I'm kind of like, man, I don't see the anti-Mormon part of it. And so I thought it was wonderful. I thought it was a great critique on religion. I think that the end, spoiler, the end when she says the prayer, and she's talking about more of she knows that this isn't a God saving us type of religion. I mean, Sister Paxton was the way that she thought was fascinating to me. So she seemed to be a very creative thinker with religion. So we tend to see people who are more orthodox, who want to be told kind of what religion is and what religion, how religion is applied. And when they die, this is where they go. And then we also see other types of people who are more creators. They're what could this mean? Perhaps this means this. And Sister Paxton to me was a creator. She was talking about the butterfly and what she wants she was assigning meaning to the butterfly. And it's interesting, as women, with Heavenly Mother, we have this theology that says, who are we going to become? That's kind of an empty blank slate, right? And so women are kind of pushed into this area where we accept kind of a masculine type of spirituality, or we create. So I really resonated with Sister Paxton, her views on prayer and us helping each other horizontally rather than directly from God, and also her view on creation versus like being told what to think, I thought was really cool. I know there was a lot of feminist critiques. Maxine Hanks had a wonderful critique, and I think it's a good thing to talk about. Power dynamics for women in religion, and this brought that to the forefront. I adored how this brought that to the forefront. I think that the LDS church's response to this was very telling, with wanting to talk about power dynamics. So overall, I would rate it 5 out of 5. If you're okay with a little gore, I think it's a great movie to go see. So.
I also really enjoyed it. I am not like a horror film person. I don't watch scary movies. So the gore was a little more jarring to me. I wasn't anticipating it.
We just got haunted houses, but
I did really enjoy it. I was a little off put by the opening scene, but I also feel like it was important to show like that members of the church are not just like naive and ignorant of everything else in the world, like it does open up to the fact that like people have these other sides, or they've been exposed to things.
Girls have sex drives, women have sex drives.
Yeah, and I also really love, though, the fact you brought up the butterfly, because I feel like there's also like butterflies, there's the metamorphosis, right? So there's change and there's growth, and like you even see that in Sister Paxton in the movie, in the way that she responds, at first, despite her exposure to the things that are in the beginning of the movie, she still kind of takes on this like, oh, I'm innocent, even though I'm really not innocent.
And that's very
and then she's like trying to like appease him, at first, and then really coming to show her ability to see what's going on. Yeah. So.
And so the sister missionaries, from my understanding, just so you know, folks, when I don't read reviews of movies, I go into a movie like I don't want to know anything about a movie when I go into it. So I haven't really done a whole lot of research before or since. But from my understanding, wasn't the two actresses that played the sister missionaries actually were sister missionaries in real life as well?
I believe they were LDS.
If they were sister missionaries, they were at one point members of the church.
Yeah. Okay. I wasn't sure about that they were members of the church. I thought I heard something about sister missionaries, but I wasn't sure. But I just thought, what a fantastic job they did. Oh my gosh. I mean, I think this is relatively new to acting, and I was just really blown away at their performance. What did you two think of it?
I really enjoyed it. I thought they did a great job. I was sad to not get to enjoy the full movie with both sisters because of, well, I guess we're spoiling, right?
Yep.
So because one of them died, I was really bummed. I was like, man, I really liked her. I wanted more of this movie with her in it, but I really enjoyed it.
Yeah. I thought it was a great commentary on how women appease men, like Jessica said. I think in LDS spaces, and I mean, this is kind of more of a different topic, but when we talk about masculinity in LDS spaces, women have to kind of fill in the gaps that masculinity doesn't have. And it's interesting, that's not the same way in fundamentalist spaces. I think fundamentalist men have unpacked what masculinity means a little more. And I'm not specifically referring to polygamy. I'm more referring to kind of unpacking what gender means. And so, but in LDS dominated spaces, there tends to be a lot of appeasing men. Like, I'm like this idea that I'm not as intelligent as you because I don't want to make you feel like, less of a man. I don't know, like you're not in the leadership role. So I saw a lot of that during the movie, and I thought that was, they hit the power dynamics right right on the head. I mean, that's so Mormon woman.
Mm.
And we see that at the beginning where they're talking about sex, they're talking about porn, they're humans. They're just normal humans. And then in the space where they're with Mr. Reed, they're pretending they're dumb. They're pretending they're stupid. They're pretending they don't understand. They're pretending and that's because they're trying to get out of this situation where he has the upper hand. And as the movie develops, you see these women kind of go through the steps of showing that they're actually highly intelligent and they know what's going on. I mean, Sister Paxton from the beginning, she sees it as Anthony Miller did an amazing critique on this, and he was talking about the levels of control that they are or are not aware of. And Sister Paxton was very aware that she was subject to this game of control, and because she was outside of the game, she was able to manipulate her way out of it. And we see that in the last scene when she looks at the game board and she sees the house. And she knew it was a game board. She knew it was a game. She knew this wasn't real religion. She knew that this was just his setup for control. So she understood the illusion, and therefore she could effectively play it.
Huh.
So, yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, I want to just real quick, Benjamin, I want you to hop in on here. Of course, Benjamin,
Thank you.
well-known Mormon fundamentalist, was raised, well, you were part of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and then found your way into Mormon fundamentalism. And I think you brought some interesting stuff to the table, especially you kind of compared Mr. Reed to Warren Jeffs. Maybe talk a little bit about that.
Right. So this is an interesting thing. I think if this movie had been made in the Mormon corridor for a Mormon audience, they probably would have titled it The Apostate instead of The Heretic. Right? Because in Mormon terms, we're taught that people who leave the church, they're dangerous, they're frightening, they're evil, and heretic isn't really a Mormon word that we use. I think that was partly used to make a broader audience for it. And so my concern was, oh no, this evil character, Hugh Grant's character, I bet he's going to be a caricature of Mormon fundamentalist men like myself. That's what I was a little bit worried about. But I also do see the parallel that I have to bring out anyway. However, they didn't play him. They played him much more exmo than Mormon fundamentalist. Absolutely. But one of the things that I think doesn't get talked much about is this essentially harem of women that Hugh Grant is abusing. They don't get named. They don't get spoken to, right? They barely speak. They're almost non-existent. They're like props, right? And that is the kind of evil that I think people fear the most. So you have Sister Paxton and Sister Barnes who are challenging him, who are intelligent, and then you have the other archetype of what happens to women in a controlling religion when they lose their voice. They lose who they are, right? And so they're being treated like animals, well, worse than animals, right? In fact, this is an interesting imagery. Hugh Grant at the very beginning is carrying a little flower pot, right, a little water pot to water things, and then in the end, he goes down there into this dungeon where he's literally torturing these women practically to death. He's spraying water on them while it's freezing cold, it's snowing, and he's spraying water on them, and he's got his little bucket and his little clippers like he's taking care of flowers in a garden. But what's he doing with it? He's doling out little bits of water for them to reach to be able to drink. He's clipping one of the women's fingernails, and then he clips her finger off with a little pruning hand clipper like you might use to trim a rose bush. And the whole while he's talking about it, he's saying, I am basically God to these people. And to me, it was like a glimpse of this is what was in store for Sister Barnes and Sister Paxton if they weren't smart. Where did these women come from? As far as I know, they're sister missionaries who succumbed to this, 5-10 years before, and have been living in this guy's dungeon ever since. Right? Because what he did was he manipulated them to the point that they lost their voice. So I made this connection to Warren Jeffs, who's the most infamous Mormon fundamentalist, apostate, heretic, essentially, in the world, because that's the kind of religious control that this movie was about critiquing. How is it that we let this happen? How can things get so bad without people fighting back? In fact, I remember thinking, even when they were in their little chapel introductory room with the belief and the disbelief door, and there were the two candlesticks, big candlesticks, and he was kind of using this as like yin and yang. He was kind of trying to create these different balances in there. But I was already thinking, I know this is a horror. There's two sister missionaries and there's two large blunt objects in that room right now. And so of course, like you do in a horror movie, you start rooting for the victim, being like, no, don't open the door. And I remember thinking to myself, just grab those candlesticks and beat him into a bloody pulp until he opens the front door. Just do it, sisters. You can fight your way out of here, But the problem is, of course, they're feeling weak. They're feeling like threatened. They've got a man who's definitely bigger and stronger than them who has locked them in a room. And that's terrifying, right? So they looked for sharp weapons first. They looked for subtle things. They wanted to trick him. They weren't ready to just directly confront him. But that's the step where I feel like, if only we could stop these things there. If we could stop it earlier, it wouldn't get so bad. Well, what happened with Warren Jeffs, right? He was a religious leader in his community, and he used control systems, psychological warfare, psychological thriller type stuff, like this movie's about, until he convinced them that he had the control, the same way Hugh Grant had the control. And Hugh Grant's character, I should just say Mr. Reed. Hugh Grant's a great actor. He's not a psychopath, right? Anyway, so Mr. Reed created this system of control that stripped people of their humanity completely until they were ready to die for him. They were ready to kill for him. They were ready to do anything he asked because they'd completely lost their will. They'd lost their agency. So forgive me, but that's another big theme I see here. It's all about choices. It's all about agency. And free agency is a major Mormon theme. And what he's trying to do is he's trying to say there is no free will. That's what Mr. Reed is saying.
Kyle wants to say something real quick.
Yeah, Benjamin, I'm so glad you brought that. You're bringing up this connection because one of the things I pulled out of this was just the rank hypocrisy of somebody that is, controlled by the power of control. At the very beginning of when the sister missionaries come into the house, what's the first uncomfortable question that he asks them? Well, what do you think about polygamy?
Yeah.
And you can kind of see them shrink into themselves. And he really, really digs into how vile and disgusting Joseph Smith was for practicing polygamy. Like, how dare him? How could anybody do something like that? And then at the end of the movie, we discover he has effectively been torturing 6 women in his basement the entire time. And so I saw that kind of outward facing, self-righteous, whitewashed tomb moment with him, when in reality, he was everything he was saying he was not, and hated and was wrong about religion, right? I thought that was a really, really good critique of I don't know what else to call it, but just human blindness to their own
to their own
faults.
evil, their own
exactly.
their own hypocrisy,
Yes.
And and I've seen this in the ex-Mo community. I'm surprised how many ex-Mormons really get into polyamory but still hate polygamists. And I'm like, it's the same thing, basically. It depends. I understand there's different stripes of it, but really, like Mr. Reed's version was the worst, most evil form of polygamy you could have. Whether or not he was having sex with them is irrelevant. He was dehumanizing these people in a way way worse than any other moral question that could come here. And that brings me to this interesting point about it. His point, Mr. Reed's point, was that there is no free will. But when he's in that dungeon with Sister Paxton and these other women in cages, he says, "Why don't you stop me? Why does nobody ever stop me?" Right? And that's when he cuts the woman's finger off, is when he's saying, like, he worships control, but in a sense, I also saw him as like this frightened little boy who kept testing the boundaries and never found one.
Mm.
And so what he's kind of doing psychologically to himself is he's trying to say, I want there to be a God, I want there to be free will, I want there to be boundaries, but I don't know how to find them. And I've done evil after evil after evil, saying, God, if you're real, stop me. And I've been doing evil after evil after evil to these women, saying, if you don't like it, stop me, tell me no. But he stripped them of their ability to say no until he had coerced them into giving up their free will, right? And so he never found his own balance because he never found his own boundaries.
So I see a pillar of light appearing over Jim Bennett, so I'm supposed to have you on next, obviously. So Jim, why don't you turn the microphone on, and I'd love to hear your perspective here.
Well, I should probably get rid of the pillar of light. I'm not quite sure what that is. Here, that's a little better. I'm going
It's
to
the
turn
Son
this
and the
light on.
Father. Just kidding.
There we go. No, Stephen, when you first had me on to Mormon Book Reviews, it was to talk about Under the Banner of Heaven. And I thought about Under the Banner of Heaven as I watched this, because my background is I was a theater major at the University of Southern California. I was the artistic director at the Tuacahn Center for the Arts for years. My plan was to be a world famous actor. It didn't really pan out as well as I thought it would. Although I do appear in a really bad Mormon movie. If you go see the movie The Home Teachers, I'm the first person that gets home taught, and they launch a turkey out of my window. So there's a after you've seen Heretic, there's a really bad movie you can go watch. But my criticism of Under the Banner of Heaven was not so much that had anything to do with the church. It had to do with the fact that these were not recognizably human beings. The dialogue was so stilted and strange. And I sat there and watched these people pretending to be members of my church who didn't sound anything like a member of my church and didn't sound anything like really a human being. I just thought it was so poorly written and so poor from a dramatic standpoint. And so that sort of informs how I went to watch Heretic. I felt like I wanted to watch it because I am really, really interested in how Latter-day Saints are portrayed on film. And I came away from this movie deciding that this was probably the most, oh geez, and there's my pillar of light again. I'm not sure what that is. I'm just so righteous that there's really no way around it. No, this was, I thought, the finest depiction of Latter-day Saints in a mainstream film that has ever been done, bar none. The fact that, I hate horror movies too. I don't like to be scared. I don't understand why anybody enjoys that. So in order to inoculate myself, I went to Wikipedia, read the entire synopsis before going into the movie, so I wasn't going to be scared about something jumping out and freaking me out. So I was able to sort of enjoy the complexity of the psychological give and take between the characters. Brilliantly written, brilliantly performed, and I took some issue with little bits of, okay, the elder going to look for him wouldn't be going out solo. He'd have a companion with him and those kinds of things. But in terms of the dialogue, in terms of just the characters, I thought these are recognizably Latter-day Saints. These are people, whoever wrote this did do their homework and understand and sort of captured what a Latter-day Saint sounds like, how a Latter-day Saint thinks. And I was really pleasantly surprised also that, you have Mr. Reed presenting that he begins with his monopoly analogy and the whole idea of iterations and how every religion is just like every other religion. And here are all of these deities that were born on December 25th. And I sat there and rolling my eyes and going, okay, this is Bill Maher. This is really shallow. This is a really stupid, shallow argument. And I was going, oh, crud. That's what I'm in for. And then out of nowhere, Sister Barnes just took him to task and came back with a really strong counter argument. And I went, wow, this is not glib. They really are going to explore some interesting things here. And the Latter-day Saints are not dupes. They're not idiots. They're not shallow thinkers. And I thought, this is really, really a huge step forward in the conversation, and Latter-day Saints now sort of have a seat at the table in that we are depicted here as being able to deal with difficult theological issues seriously and with a degree of weight and credibility that I found extraordinarily refreshing. Now, all that said, it then descends into gore. It gets, I mean, the whole thing really sort of deteriorates if you think about it for 10 seconds. The idea that he's got these women, and, you know, as Benjamin says, they're probably former sister missionaries. Wouldn't anybody notice that sister missionaries seem to disappear at this house every couple of years, or however often it is?
And that's why I think they weren't sister missionaries. I think these were women from different faith traditions. I think that's how I saw it. Like he plays this game with all believers. So I think this would have been representative. I wish he would have had different, like a black woman, like a Muslim woman, you know, different people so that they could differentiate. But that's just my theory on it. So I don't think that's a flaw. I did want to say, and actually I want to speak to some of what you had to say, Jim. Real quick, I'm going to say a couple things, and then I want us to continue the conversation. I want to bring Ryan into this. But I think it's really important, just talking about how Hollywood portrays religious believers. My mom sometimes will watch these films or movies. Moms be like, "Boy, it sure be nice if they talked to a Christian before they made this movie about Christians." And so often as believers, it just seems like it's so superficial. They get so many things wrong, just basic things, and that we're caricatures. We're not actual real developed people in these films. I have to just tell everybody that if you want to watch a great film that shows authentic Christianity in many ways, is watch The Apostle with Robert De Niro. Absolutely fantastic. Robert Duvall. Thank you so much. Yeah. Robert Duvall. Thank you. That's absolutely fantastic film. And I'll tell you, I know people just like the character he played. I know them. That is real. And it's so fascinating. As Dr. Christopher Thomas was telling me that he had watched an interview with Robert Duvall, and somebody was like, so there's actually people, this is real? You say, yeah, you know what? You need to get out a little bit more. So often these elites on the coast, they don't want to deal with flyover country. These are real people who really do believe and act that way in real life. And I think that was really important. There's a very rare authentic portrayals of people of faith. So Ryan, welcome. This is the first time you've been on the program, and I just want to welcome you on. And of course, you are an aficionado of Mormon history and culture, and you went and saw the movie twice. Let's get your perspective. You just saw it again last night.
Yes, sir. So to Jim's point, he said that it reminded him a little bit of Hugh's character, reminded him a little bit of Bill Maher, and I thought that was funny because I thought that he was meant to embody the new atheist movement of 20 years ago, and how devoid of empathy that whole thing was. And Hugh even said that he modeled the character somewhat after Dawkins, and the filmmakers said that they got the idea to make the movie after seeing an interaction between Richard Dawkins and Brandon Flowers. Brandon Flowers was on a television show to perform a song with the Killers, and Dawkins was there to be Dawkins, and he essentially fronted off Brandon Flowers, being extremely rude. I mean, that's not what Brandon was there for. And I thought that it was interesting that Hugh's character was stripping away their faith, level by level. He's taking them through this thing. And to your point, Stephen, I think that you were right, that these are missionaries from different faiths, because he has religious iconography from different faiths and books on the shelf and different things. I saw the movie twice. I was looking. And some of the things that jumped out at me were, sorry, I have a concussion. I lost my thought there. But some of the things that jumped out at me was Hugh's the fact that he was essentially canceled in the mid 1990s and hasn't had much of a career since. And he comes back and he's playing a creep essentially. And I thought that was a very interesting choice. And that's what I have so far.
So I wanted to talk about the portrayal, and we'll just open this up to the panel here. Is how do you feel like, because I agree with the critiques here that the critiques of religion were very superficial. It was like I was talking to Kyle on the phone the other day. This is dorm room talk conversations. This isn't really well thought out. And unfortunately, there's a lot of people who aren't believers who actually use these arguments, and it's so surprising. So what I thought was so fascinating is that so often Christians or believers are often shown to be very superficial people and not and not really thoughtful or very smart. But actually, I think it's actually the atheist that looks like the superficial one in this one, the one that really hasn't put a lot of thought into his actual worldview. Maybe anyone want to speak
In
to
fact,
that?
if I could just chime in there, one of the things I think is interesting is when he shifts from his thing about belief or not belief and all these other things when he's in that first round dungeon room that's all filled with water and all of that stuff, right? He starts going into like, oh, what if it's just a simulation? And she goes, now you're just improvising, right? Now you're just improvising. We've gone off script. And you're trying to make up for lost time. You're trying to find a way to get us back into the game when you know you've already lost, basically. And I thought that that was kind of interesting because she's saying, look, I don't even have to engage with this argument. This is nonsense. And the only reason you're trying to play this whole different thing about, oh, don't worry, Sister Barnes will be resurrected. Maybe it's a simulation. Maybe she's an NPC. She's like, you're just making this up as you go along. And I thought that that was, unfortunately for me, that also broke the fourth wall a little bit because I felt like the film up to that point had been trying to make a more thoughtful approach to religion. And then after that, it really, the threads are kind of all coming loose. And I felt like the screenwriter was also improvising from that point on. It was like, oh, okay, well, I know I was leading up to something, but I think I'm going to have to just play with these themes in a new way because I'm not really sure where this is going. That's kind of where it felt like to me.
Jasmine?
Yeah, I thought this was fascinating. So, I mean, so we have our understanding of the world, right? So we have our understanding of who God is. We have our understanding of why we're here on earth. We have our understanding of where we're going, what's important, right? And something that I really liked that the movie did is they started bringing in other religions. So like, what do Sikhs think? What do Sikhs think of God? What do Sikhs think, the purpose of life is? I mean, what about if we look at like intrafaith, and I'm sure Ryan has a lot to say on this. What about community of Christ? Like they do temples very differently than us. And what do they think is the point of life? What do they think the God is? What's their religious take? I mean, the Quran. I mean, like, how many of us actually study as Mormons? How many of us actually study lots of religions to kind of understand who we are in the place of all of it? And that was something that I actually think is really valid. I think it was Max Mueller. He said, a man who understands one religion understands none. And I've actually found that in my faith development, that's largely true because we don't really understand as Mormons who don't look at intrafaith and interfaith dialogue and the qualities of different faiths. We don't actually understand the human experience to God unless we actually are able to dip into other religions and see why other people are religious. And at least for me, how I've understood it is I've come full circle to being like, Mormonism is my home. But I found that it was my home by traveling to different places. And so if there is one really valid critique, it wouldn't be the anti-Mormon and anti-religious arguments. It would be more of this idea that Mormons could afford to look at interfaith and intrafaith dialogue. And what can we learn? I mean, what can we learn from your religion, Steve? What can we learn from, how do atheists understand death? How do atheists understand tragedy? Like how do people who like how Muslims, like how do they deal with the question of human suffering? And so to be really open-minded about these topics, I think was really, really fruitful. I mean, if you look at, Don's Don's trajectory in his religious development, this is what he did. He went, he had an atheist phase, and then he had a Baha'i phase. and he dipped into all different types of religions, and then he came back to Mormonism, and that's very much how I found my religious core, is that I've actually explored all of these different things and then come back. Mormonism is my home, and it's true because it's true to me. And it's my home. So it's kind of the different layers of is it true versus is it valuable versus is it my home? Right? There are different levels of belonging. And people who, and Don and I, we do a lot of apologetics work. People who
Just so
struggle.
everybody knows, you're Don Bradley's wife. Just everybody's, in case you didn't know that. So Jasmine and Lee, they got
Please
engaged
pray for him.
earlier. Yeah.
Yeah, people who work with apologetic ideas and are very worried about the church being true or false, they tend to be more at the top levels of belonging, where there's that dichotomy of, if it's not true, then I don't want to be here, or if it's not true in this way, I don't want to be here, right? And people who tend to find more belonging, they tend to peel back those layers, more of like more of it doesn't necessarily matter if it's true in this way or that way. What matters is that this is where I'm called to do God's work. And then that's where you kind of peel back of, what is God to me? Who is God to me? Right. And so I thought that that was a great commentary, the thing that came from the movie. And I don't think us Mormons need to be defensive about it. I wish the church didn't come off with that defensive. It sounded very defensive, the church's response to it, as did the Mormon housewives' response as well. The Mormon Secret Life of Mormon Wives one that came out. I mean, if you actually watch the series, it talks a lot about the life of like what Mormon women go through, And so instead of focusing on what's true or false, actually focused on a lot of belonging. How do these women treat each other? What is the actual lived experience of Mormon women in the ward and in to each other and to their God? And it was very, very deep. You see a lot of character development in real time. So, when the church comes off saying, oh, that's not a portrayal of Mormon women, or that's not a portrayal of Mormonism, I'm thinking, like, we're all human. We all go through these really painful growth spurts. We all deal with sexuality. We all deal with suffering. And I actually thought Heretic and Secret Lives of Mormon Wives was very showed a lot of the human side of women. And so I couldn't be more happy with both of those series. And I don't think we need to be defensive about religious growth and what it is to be a human.
So I think Kyle and Benjamin both wanted to weigh in real quick.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to go
I
back
think
to
Jessica wanted to weigh in as well too.
Oh, okay, great,
go,
Jessica.
have
Go ahead.
Jessica go first.
I just want to say I found that so beautiful, so much of what you were saying, and it made me think about, like, to really understand one religion, you need to understand other religions, and it made me think. I currently teach English to speakers of other languages, and it made me think about how little I felt like I knew about English as I went to actually teach it to other people who speak another language. And you don't realize that about language until you are exposed to other pieces of language. Like, other languages help you see concepts within your own language. And I think the same can be said of religion. Like, understanding things about your own religion can be like that.
Contextual?
Yeah, like, you can add more depth to that by expanding your knowledge of all of the religions. And I feel like in Heretic, Mr. Reed is trying to, like, pick at religion, like all religion, with his monopoly examples, right? And then, but I don't think that has to be bad. I think there's pieces of knowledge and strength that can come from realizing that throughout time, throughout human history, these concepts have been important to people, or these are some things that, like, we can see throughout religion. And I also love, like, this is what's true to me, or this is home for me, and realizing that there's more than just the doctrines and more than just the teachings, but it's also like okay, I find myself at home here. I feel like this is where I belong.
These are my people.
Yeah.
This is my tribe. I will live and die for my tribe and the health of my tribe. Once people find belonging, they work a lot more with concepts of health. Like, how healthy are we? They don't work with concepts of like, is the Book of Mormon historically, where did it happen? Like those aren't once people find belonging, those black and white apologetic issues are no longer issues. So, and actually it gets to a space where not only are they not issues, they're possibilities, right? So like if we see the Book of Mormon as non-historical, well then what is it? It's futuristic. What what about the Book of Mormon can we see in the future, right? And this falls in line with Joseph Smith and being a magician, which makes a lot of people uncomfortable, but it is what it is. And that's the beautiful part of religion, is it is very much seership, future oriented. So if we can let go of these black and white ways of thinking, we can actually, it becomes multidimensional and it becomes futuristic. And so I thought Heretic did a really great job at like shaking us out of the black and white and bringing in the color. So
Right. I love it.
Jessica's such a badass, I just want to say.
Oh, you're so kind.
Kyle?
Yeah, thank you, Jasmine and Jessica. I resonate a lot with what you're saying in the interfaith space as an evangelical, speaking with Latter-day Saints. One of the things you could say about this film is that Mr. Reed is the absolute worst kind of interfaith interlocutor. Like he's only looking at religion to prove it wrong. Something to go back to what Benjamin was saying. I read the simulation thing a little bit differently than you did, Benjamin. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the way that it hit me. I had the same concerns when he starts going into the simulation thing. I was like, oh no, don't let this guy actually be some like college age 20-year-old theory bro that's like trying to impress people with this like meta commentary on reality. But then I thought about it more, and I think it might have been the writer's critique of like the iteration of what the new atheist children are today, which is the simulation theory, right? And you're almost watching, there should be another Monopoly game of an iteration that's called simulation theory today, because what happens when naturalism and materialism continually butt up against what they can't possibly think is true is that the cosmos has some kind of purpose or
at least
telos or end for right. So it has to be a simulation. And what's funny about that is Mr. Reed spends all this time, quote unquote, disproving religion. And then when he goes to improvise, it's something that's you can't possibly prove. And so I saw that as meta
because it's something you
commentary
can't prove or disprove, he's also reinventing God. The simulation theory just basically says God is real, God created everything, and you can't prove me wrong. That's basically what simulation theory is in a nutshell anyway.
Yeah, so for me, it was meta commentary on the simulation theory people that are like, y'all, don't you realize you're the ones that are improvising because you don't know where to go next. So I thought that was kind of an interesting commentary if that's what the writers were going with.
And that really is an interesting point. And like you said, this is why this is not an anti-religion movie. This is a pro-religion movie because Mr. Reed is so clearly in the wrong over and over and over again. And he's this, if anybody's a bad caricature of religion, he's a bad caricature of atheists. He's a bad caricature of possibly ex-Mormons. He's a bad caricature of simulation theory, college dorm talk, right? That we mentioned earlier. But the idea of shallowness versus depth that Jasmine brought up is really brought up by this as well, Kyle, which is that they kind of bookended the movie with this. And this was my favorite thing about the movie, is they started near the beginning with a quote from Gordon B. Hinckley about how either it's all true or it's all a fraud, and therefore either you should be all in or all out, right? And so there's this, and I don't mind critiquing church leaders, so forgive me. But that is exactly the poster quote in my mind for this extremely shallow view of religion. That religion is about belief, that all occurs as an internal thing. It's not an action in the world. It's not future oriented. It's not creative. It's just, am I in or out? And the only way I'm in or out is if I decide if I believe or not within my own mind or my own heart. And that changes nothing about the world. It's just this abstract, loyalty to a concept or some other concept. And that kind of religion, I believe what Jasmine was basically pointing out, is that's just so shallow. The moment you look deeper or you find belonging or you're part of a community, it's not just about do you believe or not. It's about what are we going to do with this knowledge? How does this passage or this quote or this anything that we learn from religion, how does this make my community better? How do we enact goodness in the world? How do we bring God and spirituality into being, into life? And then what do they do on the other end? So they start with this very shallow quote, I believe, from Gordon B. Hinckley that makes it sound like, look, either you sign up for everything and you don't question anything or get out, is kind of this, there's no community in that, right? And then in the end, there's the discussion about prayer, which I think we absolutely have to talk about, right? Where Sister Paxton, I think, transcends the entire debate when she talks about, I'm not praying to get God to fulfill a laundry list for me. Right? So I guess I do have to give the context, right? They've both been stabbed. Sister Paxton has been stabbed in the gut, which fortunately for her takes a lot longer to die from.
Was that a sign and token? Just kidding.
Yeah, there you go. Okay. And she stabbed him in the throat. Maybe another penalty. So yes, there's some interesting temple commentaries here, but that will be I need another 5 minutes for that, so I'm going to skip that for now. They're both been stabbed, and he knows he's dying. Mr. Reed is now dying, and so this was powerful to me because of the saying, "There are no atheists in foxholes." The last thing he says when he's definitely knows he is going to die is he kind of gurgles out, "Pray, pray," right? Because he's thinking, I'm going to die. No one can save me now but God. So here he is, the controlling, I hate religion person, but why did he hate religion so much? I think he's a believer. I think Mr. Reed's a believer. And he's thinking, oh my gosh, this is it. I need to pray. I need you to pray for me. Pray for my soul, because I'm about to meet God. And I know I'm going to die of this. And then she has her line, prayer doesn't work. And I just wish, if I could change one thing about this movie, I wish she'd say, prayer doesn't work like that, is the way I would have had her say it. Because then she clearly goes in and says, prayer does work. It just doesn't work like that, is what her explanation is, right? That if you're looking for prayer to be this moment where, oh yeah, just because I'm a sister missionary, I'm going to pray in this dungeon, and God's going to come down and forgive you for all of this. And God's going to heal you of your wounds, and we're all going to sing Kumbaya, and we're all going to go upstairs and have blueberry pie that isn't poisoned. No, that's not how this is going to work. That's not how this is going down. But I still care, right? Like, Sister Paxton has absolute compassion for everyone. This is why she didn't want to kill him. I think she had so much compassion. The first thing she did when she saw the women who were in the cages suffering, she took off her coat, even in the cold, and gave her last bit of comfort, her last bit of safety in her life was that she still had her coat, and she gave up everything and just immediately gave it to the first person she saw, because she's like, you're suffering, and I'm going to give even my last security, right? So she's this giving person. And so then she just prays for him. She prays for him anyway. And that is that future-looking kind of faith. It's an active faith. It's not about like, some proposition that I'm going to subscribe to or not. This isn't a game. Real prayer isn't a game, and it's real, and it really does work. But how does it work? It works because she has become this transformational kind of creature where her compassion is bigger than the evil of the world. And she's going to demonstrate that she has compassion even for her killer. Right? This ultimate forgiveness, so she's this Christ figure, but she's not saving him in his sins. She's saving him from his sins. She's praying and letting him, even in the end, even though it's not going to save him in the way he wants to be saved, she will choose love. She will choose compassion in spite of it all. So, anyways, I just loved that, and that shows the difference between depth and shallowness in the religion, but it also bookended the movie in my mind between the shallowness of propositional faith, believing in something, versus active faith, doing something, becoming something. So
Fantastic. Jim, you want to weigh in?
Well, listening to all of this, it's so fascinating because, and I'm going to back up a little bit and take a perspective less of a theological perspective and more from an entertainment standpoint. Thinking that I was going to be a world famous Mormon actor, I wrestled with the fact that I was also being raised in a church that insisted I shouldn't be watching R-rated movies. I mean, that was the huge shibboleth when I was growing up. You shouldn't drink Diet Coke and you shouldn't watch R-rated movies. I think President Benson even gave a talk where he specifically said that, and now they backed down from that to some degree and said movie ratings don't accurately reflect content and everything else like that. But there is this very sort of puritanical Victorian abhorrence for this kind of a movie. And I grew up with the idea that an R-rated movie is just so morally offensive that there's no possible way that we can gain any kind of value from it. And I shudder to think how many members of the church won't even consider seeing this movie because of those kinds of boundaries that have been set up by cultural expectations. And I think that's a real shame, because this discussion demonstrates that there is so much about this movie that is sparking really deep introspection from people on any side of the religious question. And I would hope that Latter-day Saints would recognize, I mean, it was always so frustrating to me as an actor encountering people who would say, okay, well, are you willing to swear on stage? Are you willing to take your clothes off on stage or in a movie? And I thought, well, I've been blessed with the kind of body that no one would ever pay to see naked, so I don't think that's ever going to be a problem for me. But it's, those kind of puritanical, weird little hang-ups get in the way, I think, of Latter-day Saints being able to appreciate a really thoughtful and powerful work that I think ultimately can strengthen their faith. I think it strengthened my faith. Being challenged like that in a way that is thoughtful and is, and it is not didactic. I mean, one of the things that's wonderful about this is that, as I said before, I was really nervous about what I sounded like a cheap Bill Maher monologue. And I thought, really, that's where this is going. This is just going to be
real quick, Ryan, could you just hit mute real quick, because there's a speaker thing going. Thank you very much. And I want you to chime in real quick here too, Ryan, when you get a chance. But here, Jim, continue. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So I thought this is going to be so shallow, and it wasn't. And it was all of a sudden, oh my goodness, we're going to get all kinds of really different perspectives here. And it's going to give me an awful lot to think about, and it's going to be wonderful. So I in all of this discussion, I am so encouraged by how much everybody has gotten out of this particular film, and I would hope that other Latter-day Saints would do the same. And also, as a point of order, I think it was Ryan who said that this is kind of a comeback for Hugh Grant because he was canceled in the 90s. Hugh Grant was arrested for trying to pick up a prostitute right before his movie 9 Months was about to come out. It's a movie nobody really remembers because it's not very good. But I think it's important to note that he has had quite a career since then and has done quite a lot of work. One of the most recent things he did that I really enjoyed, if you go on Netflix, Jerry Seinfeld made a really stupid little movie about Pop-Tarts, the history of Pop-Tarts. And Hugh Grant plays Thurl Ravenscroft, who was the voice of Tony the Tiger. And he plays him as this frustrated Shakespearean actor who is stuck being a mascot for breakfast cereal and just hates it. And he is so delightful in that role. And he's done quite a lot of I mean, he's best known for romantic comedies, and those continued through the 90s. They continued through the 2000s. Probably my favorite, relatively recent one that he did was Music and Lyrics with Drew Barrymore, where he plays sort of he's the stand-in for the other side of Wham, other than George Michael.
So
And
maybe what you're saying about Hugh Grant is that he's great.
he's great. Well, the other thing about Hugh Grant that's interesting, and this isn't necessarily the topic here, is that everybody who works with him hates him. I mean, especially his leading ladies. They talk about just how awful he is. And he was confronted on that by the British, his name for wonderful British broadcaster, talk show host, has everybody on the couch. You know who I'm talking about? Anyway, and they went through the list of, well, Drew Barrymore hates you. And he goes, yeah, I can see that. And this person hates you. This person hates you. Yeah, I understand that. And I saw an interview with Jerry Seinfeld where he said, yeah, I kind of hated Hugh Grant while he was doing this. And then after it came out, he called me and said, I had a great time. I loved it. And we went out together, and now we're the best of friends. But apparently he's very difficult to work with on set, but he's had a very successful career. This is a sort of a departure for him, but I think what's so interesting about it is that I don't think another actor would have had the same kind of impact, because Hugh Grant's history of charm and that sort of romantic comedy ideal that he's known for makes Mr. Reed so much creepier. You know, as he's sitting there and he's smiling and he flashes that lovely smile and he cracks these little jokes and he makes it's like it's so much more terrifying. And I really think kudos needs to go to the casting director, who saw that Hugh Grant, who, you know, most people would look at that and go, why would Hugh Grant isn't scary? Why would you have Hugh Grant as the bad guy? Somebody was able to see that persona that Hugh Grant has developed over decades is really going to be a helpful way to make this movie that much more terrifying.
Well, and that male-female dynamic that Jasmine was talking about earlier is powerful here, right? Because he's this romantic leading man, right? And he's so deferential, even in the film, very apologetic, kind of downplayed. You know what I mean? Oh, I'm sorry, but do you really want me to try to check with my wife, or do you understand that I've been lying to you?
Yeah.
You know, and he's saying it so softly. And then there's this whole like, oh my gosh, this isn't gentle. This is threatening. This is so threatening.
So, hey, Ryan, I want
I
to
think
get you
we
into
call that benevolence.
So,
Well,
Ryan,
and I think he was a great choice for that. Like I watched that movie, and the way he was so charming, and yet he's obviously the bad guy. I always hear about like Ted Bundy, and I've never watched like the Zac Efron Ted Bundy movie, but I was like, huh, this makes me want to watch that, because this is the kind of vibe I'm getting, where it's like, oh, he's very like interesting to listen to and talk to, and like he seems like such a nice guy, but obviously he's not, and he's saying that they can leave, but yet, oh, well, now they're gonna, doesn't really matter whether you choose to believe or disbelieve. You're still going to go to the same dungeonous place, and I'm going to do terrible things and be terrifying.
This
Yeah.
is a much better movie than the Zac Efron movie, just to save you some time.
I'm sure it is, because there's a lot to think about. I really, I think about the R rating, and how, we're not, that's been a thing in the Mormon community for a long time, to like not really watch R-rated movies. And when I was younger, I would not watch R-rated movies. There were members in my family who would, or my mom would say, well, sometimes to understand history, you really need to be okay, like history is R, or there's other movies that I've seen that have an R rating that are really powerful movies. And I feel like this movie was a very powerful movie. And it kind of makes me sad, almost a little mad, knowing that if they've done their research on the Mormon community, they probably also know that there are a significant number of Mormons who would not watch this because of the R rating. And I'm like, you're like keeping people from watching this, even though, I mean, I feel like it was a great movie. And I don't know that there's much, if anything, that I would change about it. And so maybe it needs that rating. but it is sad that there will be people that will inevitably miss out on it because of the rating.
You know
No,
what's
I-
R-rated is Mormon polygamy. Historical Mormon polygamy is XX rated.
Absolutely. Actually, the Bible is too. If you actually give a literal portrayal of the Bible, it's very X-rated. As a matter of fact, one of the highest grossing rated R movies of all time is The Passion of the Christ. So, it's
well,
Or the Book of Mormon. The guy cuts off the guy's head and still
Yeah.
stands up trying to fight. I'm like, man, that's worse than R, dude.
well, the highest form of Mormon liturgy is the temple ceremony. And one of the key characters in the temple ceremony is Satan himself. And it's always been bizarre to me that we're willing to depict Satan, but only if Satan acts within certain Victorian norms. Satan is never allowed to swear or take off his clothes or beat anybody up. He just needs to stand there looking evil. And how we depict fictionally evil is a taboo in Mormon culture that I think we would be better off if we were to get over it.
okay. Ryan, did you want to chime in?
Yeah, I just wanted to make the point that religious trauma, deconstruction causes trauma. And Jasmine was talking about Don and his journey. And I think there was a question being asked in the movie about religious trauma and what we do with that. As you see, like with Paxton, she went through, as she said, with the Robert Frost quote, and she ended up having empathy for others, and she was able to pray for people even though she didn't believe in it. Meanwhile, you have Hugh Grant going through the same journey and ending up a sadistic psychopath. So I think there's a real question being asked there, and I just wanted to make that point. Thank you.
Excellent, excellent. So as we're kind of just putting a bow on this whole conversation, I just want to get everybody, maybe if you have any final observations you'd like to make about the film. Let's start with you, Kyle.
Yeah, I'll make two observations. One of my favorite ones was towards the end of the film, the writers and directors really tipped their card to what they were getting at when they showed Dante's Inferno, and how there's been a descent that got lower and lower from the living room to the chapel room to the dungeon, and then there's like dungeons within the dungeon, literally doors that Paxton has to open before she finally gets into the core of his control, which was freezing cold. And if you know anything about Dante's Inferno, his hell is not hot, it's ice cold. I just thought that was absolutely brilliant. And then that sparked a thought in my mind of seeing, for me anyway, this kind of Christian meta narrative of Christ being crucified by evil, but then victoriously raising again in resurrection to destroy evil itself. So you have Mr. Reed, who's seeking the destruction of the sister missionaries in a cold dungeon, but it's Mr. Reed who actually dies by the one he seeks to destroy. And so you have this theme of evil seeking to destroy faith, but it's actually going to be destroyed by the faith it seeks to destroy. Like the ultimate plot twist in this kind of Christian cosmology. But for me, and this is totally tongue-in-cheek, the biggest plot twist of the film was the fact that Eric Foreman, son of Red Foreman from That 70s Show, not only converted to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, but became a bishop. I was very shocked by that. So glad to see what happened to Eric Foreman. We really don't know after the show was canceled, but now we do. He was a bishop somewhere out in the western United States.
Okay, yeah, I got that. Well, that's good. That's great. Great observation on your part, Kyle. Benjamin Munch, give us your final thoughts on this.
Okay. A few final thoughts. One of the themes that I thought was rather amusing was Mormon underwear. And then, of course, on a deeper level, we talked a little bit more about temple penalties, which are not something the mainstream LDS Church believes in or practices anymore or has in there, but the idea that specifically the throat, the gut, and also the heart, right, are symbolically represented as the temple sacrifices, or the sacrifice of the broken heart and the contrite spirit. All these things are represented symbolically in that, and that's kind of how the dying goes down in this rather gruesome when it gets gory, right? And I thought it was really interesting because Sister Barnes was clearly not going to be controlled. That's why she's the first to die, right? His whole game, whatever he's done with these other women, whatever his purpose was to get control, to prove to himself as much as to them, but to prove that there is no free will. There is only this absolute destiny, and that he can control it. He can master it. And Barnes was like, I will not be controlled, and I'm going to make a plan, and we're going to get rid of this guy. We're gonna have to kill him. We're going to have to kill him. We're going to have to get out. And she was so clearly doing that. So she made the code word Mormon underwear. And when she says it, he attacks her first and kills Sister Barnes by cutting her throat. And I thought it was interesting because that is the ultimate anti-religious thing, is against free speech. The throat is symbolic of one's ability to speak. And Barnes said, even if I'm not strong enough to challenge him physically, I will not stop challenging him intellectually. Right? So she was not going to shut up. She was going to fight him. And that's why he decided to try to silence her voice by cutting her throat, right? So I think that was a really cool symbolic gesture, and especially interesting that they tied it to temple stuff by making the code word Mormon underwear. Now, well, magic underwear, right? And this is one of the reasons why I thought this was fun at the very beginning, when they've got the punk kids that try to pants Sister Paxton, and make fun of her. Mormon underwear, magic underwear, is one of these like buzzwords that I thought they used brilliantly. Not just because Mormons don't ever use this term. Mormons never call it their magic underwear. That is derogatory. It's the whole point of it is to be offensive, right? This is an anti-Mormon or an anti-religious screed that they've made up as an epithet to make fun of the faith. And that's pretty much the only context you ever hear the term magic underwear, is if they're trying to mock Mormons. But they kind of reclaim it by using it as this code word, and then he even says it to her, and that's when she stabs him, right? So I thought that this was kind of interesting that they used that as kind of a way to show the difference, I think, between this anti-religious view that Mr. Reed has and how false it is, right? That's the kind of thing that you have to fight back against, and that's what truly silences him in the end. Is once again, it's the lie. It's the lie that he has that there's nothing to any of this. I am the God, right? Is basically Mr. Reed wants to be God. And when he's using the term magic underwear, and then she's like, that's it, I've got him, I have to do this, and she kills him, or she gives him a finishing blow anyway, a blow that does lead to his death. She's silencing him. She's putting an end to his argument, his shallow argument that all of religion is a caricature, it's all stupid, and so then she silences him in the throat as well, which I think is kind of an interesting thing, because when I view these sacred symbols that I do hold sacred, I see them in that context, that they tell us something about the nature of God. They tell us something about the nature of the consequence of our actions. That, like, when we lie, we lose our voice. We lose the voice of truth, right? And so what has he done? He's lied, and he's lost his voice. And then the flip side, Sister Barnes is going to speak truth no matter what. And so that's why he is so desperate to try to silence her. And so, let's not allow ourselves to be silenced in that way, which I thought that was a fun way to draw it together. And I guess that's my main, I've had to say.
The double J's chime in here, the sister missionaries. And by the way, I wanted to say, I said, Jasmine, I said that you were Don Bradley's wife. You are married to Don Bradley. I think sometimes it sounds a little too much like, well, like he belongs to you, so, or you belong to him, you belong to each other. All right, so unmute your mic, and then I'd like for you two to chime in. There we go.
I think the things that stick out to me most about this movie, Mr. Reed really tries to bring, he's like, religion is control. This is the real religion, but I think also it's so important to look at the way women are like represented in his story, but also like how they help each other, like I think the story would not have worked as well with like elders, it would not have worked with a pair of elders, the way it works with a couple of sister missionaries, and there is so much depth that can be gone into with um looking at women and religion and
Yes.
the feelings that we as women might have as it relates to control and hierarchies and patriarchy and things like that.
Mhm.
And you can see that in his narrative that he builds, and yet at the same time there's so much power that comes from these women uniting together by like the one woman telling them that it's not real, right?
Yeah.
And then by like Sister Barnes miraculously saves Sister Paxton, and even the fact that she had been trying to like help her before she got killed with, okay, you've got to do this, you've got to stab him because he's not going to expect it from you, and really working together with that. And that there's so much, I just find that so powerful. And I love that about this film, that it not only addresses these things with religion, but it also addresses religion and women. And I think that's amazing.
Jasmine?
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I absolutely agree. This is something that I spend a lot of time thinking about. I have two comments to make on two P's, polygamy and prayer. So when we look at historical Mormon polygamy and we look at the record that we have from the women, that's really telling how historical Mormon polygamy was rolled out from the very beginning. Ben had a really good point and is very in touch with the female perspective of polygamy in general. But earlier on, he was talking about the namelessness of these women. What women are we aware of that Joseph Smith had relationships with? Most people can name one or three or five. Can we name 40, or 38? Brigham Young's wives, all nameless, except maybe a couple usually for most people. So women's stories tend to not be valued. And this is something that I think was the ultimate psychological thriller in the movie, was how are women treated? When we look at D&C 132, when we look at how Emma is treated and talked to in D&C 132, it's a can of worms when it comes to control and women. And, if we talk about free agency, where is the free agency there? I think that talking about polygamy is the ultimate standard of like self-reflection on how women are treated. That's not a statement pro or anti-polygamy. That's a statement of like, let's open up the can of worms and ask a lot of questions. Does polygamy benefit women? Does it harm women? What are the benefits? What are the harms? Are there ways to do it where it does benefit? Are there ways to do it where it's harmful? Another thing that wasn't addressed in the movie but is addressed in the historical record is polyandry. Is there a way to equalize polygyny and polyandry by, if we go with the accepted historical LDS record, having both genders participate in this? What is the way forward here? I appreciate the polygamy skeptic movement because they've taken a microscope to the sources. And I think that's really, really valuable. And how women are treated also bleeds down to how children are treated. How children are treated bleeds down to the next generation and the generation after that and the generation after that. So it's a really important conversation regarding that. How does God treat women? How does Goddess treat women? How does Heavenly Mother treat her daughters? These are all spaces where we still need to create. And I'm of the personal opinion that I don't think that prophets can reveal on Heavenly Mother. I don't think that that's how it works. And I'll refer to Maxine Hanks's Women and Authority on that. There's a lot of historical work on that. So for women to actually step into a spiritual empowerment space, I think is where we're going to fill in a lot of those gaps. How that works structurally, I think needs to come from the bottom up. Because instead of top down, and we see Moses arguing with God. We as LDS people, most of us think of Revelation as top down, but historically, Revelation is from bottom up. If we pull out all of the historical narratives, the people are the ones that say, "Hey, God, what about this? What about that?" And so I think kind of sitting and having a more passive faith where we want to be told how to live doesn't necessarily fit into the scriptures. What we actually see is people rising and saying, "Hey, God, what the heck here? What about this? What about that?" And that's more in line with the history of how Revelation works. So that's my commentary on polygamy. As far as prayer, is prayer 95% human and 5% God, or 95% God and 5% human, right? And if we see like in Buddhism, right, we do these meditations. I mean, we have Buddhist monks meditating for each one of us right now. They like meditate around the clock. And they take the approach that, we're going to, a large amount of them take the approach that we save each other. And that's how God saves us, is that we save each other. And that is really in line with a lot of very spiritually developed teachers, is that they work a lot with the internal to God rather than God to the internal. So if we study Joseph Smith and how he restored the gospel, what we see is that Joseph Smith was initiated himself before God initiated him. He was the one that went into the grove, and he was the one that said, he was the one who sought out for God. And yeah, that's my commentary there, is that we can have a more active faith. We can think about faith in more dynamic ways that are deeper, in regards to polygamy, in regards to prayer, in regards to our relationship with God, in regards to being gods and goddesses ourselves. So, yep.
Right. All right, Jim, and then we'll have Ryan.
Well, I mean, I think this has been a wonderful discussion, and I'm really grateful to have been a part of it. And I thank everybody for the great insights that you've shared here. And I am so encouraged that a Latter-day Saint depiction on screen can spark a discussion that is this significant and meaningful. And to me, that's my greatest takeaway from this, is that I see the Latter-day Saint tradition as having to some degree arrived, in that we are now capable of being represented accurately on screen and being used as proxies to discuss really important and thoughtful and powerful ideas. And I don't know that has ever really happened before. Latter-day Saint depictions on screen are didactic usually, or they're mocking. The internal stuff that we produce as a church is done essentially to beat people over the head with trying to get them to join the church. And outsiders that depict us usually were the punchline for a joke, or as in Under the Banner of Heaven, we're sort of an object lesson for what a cult is like. I mean, there isn't really one of the things that I loved about this was that it was not pro or anti LDS in any sort of way. It was just, here are some real people in a situation, and these people are Latter-day Saints, and that is informing their reaction to what's happening around them. And in no way is the audience ever asked to believe or disbelieve in the claims of the church. They're simply asked to accept that these are real people in this situation, and the audience very clearly identifies with them, is given the opportunity to identify with them and to root for them. You're rooting for Sister Paxton and Sister Barnes. I'm not sure who said it earlier, but yeah, I was heartbroken when Sister Barnes died just because I wanted more to spend more time with her. I thought she was just such a fascinating person. And so it's that to me is the real takeaway. And it's such a surprise to me that it would happen in a horror film, which is a film I would never see under other circumstances. But I'm just really grateful that this film exists, and I'm hoping that it's the beginning of sort of a larger trend. I'm hoping that you watch movies where there are Catholic characters and there are Jewish characters and there are Muslim characters, maybe not so much Muslim. I think that's a little bit more of a taboo. But you see religious people, and it's not sort of the point of the movie. It's not the center of everything. It's just a part of the character's life that informs what they do. And I have longed for the day when Latter-day Saint characters can get the same treatment. And this is the first time I've really ever seen it. And I hope to see more of it.
Oh, that's great. Thanks for the observations. You having your theater background really has added greatly to this conversation. So Ryan, wrap it up with you.
Yeah, so if you're afraid the movie is going to destroy your faith, I think that you can think again. I know that the church issued a statement about the movie, telling people that maybe they shouldn't see it, but I think that the statement was issued more because not that they were afraid that it was going to destroy anyone's faith or anything like that, but that it was going to make young kids afraid to go on their Mormon missions the way that Jaws made people afraid to go in the water in 1975. I think that there's really nothing wrong with the movie. I think they had to make a statement because this is a horror movie portraying Mormon missionaries in a bad situation. So I would say go see the movie if you don't mind horror movies. It's not going to destroy your faith. The young Mormon missionary ladies are the heroes of the story. So that's all I have.
Love it. And I just want to say I really loved this panel discussion today with all of you. It's great. Some of you are here for the first time. Some of you returned, and I just thought it was a great conversation we had today. I want to thank Kyle for putting this bug in my ear or whatever they say to do this. I wasn't planning on it. I kind of wasn't even on my radar screen, to be honest with you. I thought it was just some kind of horror slasher film about Mormon missionaries. I didn't take it too seriously. But there was a lot of interesting things about this movie. I thought that they did do their homework. I thought they were respectful of religious faith, and I think they did a fantastic job. And I also think that for atheists watching, I think that they show that a lot of the arguments these people use can also be very shallow and bring more to the table. Of course, I know some atheists are fantastically smart people and have very good reasons to be atheists, and I'll never disparage them, being an ex-atheist myself. So, folks, I want to hear what you thought about it. Leave your comments leave your comments. We'd love to hear from you. You can talk to us on Reddit, Facebook, as well, of course, here on YouTube. Really greatly appreciate it. And there will be links in the description for those of you who'd like to financially support the channel. And remember, the most important thing is this: all the voices of the Restoration will be heard here on Mormon Book Reviews.